Okay, you guys, if you're anything like me, you love a big, grand goal. You love at the beginning of the year planning out all the amazing things that you're going to try to accomplish in the year to come. And I don't know about you, but that's not worked out so great for me in the past. And so I did this year sit back and say, I think it's time to maybe do things a little bit differently. And I actually started rolling out this idea at the end of last year. We started doing it with my Patreon of shifting toward making small little daily changes. Now, this is not a new philosophy. This is talked about in all kinds of books like Atomic Habits and The Feel-Good Effect. I think to a certain extent, even in The Lazy Genius Way. But I really had to make it personal to me and look at what is going to motivate me to get out of kind of the rut that I was in and actually start to see change in my life and not be so focused on the big shiny thing that I want to accomplish that isn't really in my control. Because a lot of times these goals that we set out for aren't so much goals as hopes and dreams. We can say all we want, how many people we want to be following us on social media or how much money we want to be making, but we don't really have full control over how those things happen. But we do have control over the little things that we do day in and day out. So I'm going to talk about how I have shifted my perspective on things, how I'm approaching this year as far as goals go, and what has really been working for me so far. If you don't know who I am, I'm Mackenzie Kappa. I'm the podcaster behind Live Well Anyway. I'm a voice actor and a mom, and I also have a Patreon called Live Well Together, where it's a whole community of other ladies who are all trying to live well in the midst of all the everyday chaos that we all experience. We talk a lot about planning and wellness and beauty and all kinds of fun things that help us to take advantage of the lives that we have, even when there's a lot of chaos. Okay, so what am I doing with these goals? How am I approaching things differently? Well, back in November in my Patreon, I decided, okay, I want to do these daily things that I'm going to keep track of, but I also need like a little bit of accountability, and I know I'm going to need a little bit of encouragement. So we started challenges. We did a 3-week challenge in November where we set very low bar goals. 10 minutes of reading a personal development book. So that could be anything from something about prayer to productivity or whatever is going to help you to become a better version of yourself. And we also had to have our sink empty every night before we went to bed. And I stipulated that it didn't even have to be that you had done the dishes. Like you could pile the dishes on the counter if that's what it took to make your sink empty, because I put the logic to it that 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to go ahead and do the dishes. So that's how you get them out of the sink. And I think I only piled them on the counter once or twice. I really did start to do my dishes more. So we only had these 3 things. And then we issued a few little bonus challenges on the weekends, things like meal planning and different things that we're prepping for the holidays and all that kind of thing. And we all noticed that these little teeny things that we were doing really started to have a big impact on our life overall. I noticed that the more I was keeping my sink empty at night, the more I tended to keep up on the dishes throughout the day. And the more I tended to have my counters cleared as well, except for those days when I was, like piling the dishes on the counter. But I really started to see that all these little habits that I was making sure I was doing, because we would get a point. That was part of the challenge. You would get a point for each of these things every day that you did them. So we were trying to compete for the most points. And that little bit of competition was accountability enough for me to stay on top of the challenge and a lot of other ladies to stay on top of the challenge and see how doing these things were obviously effective in and of themselves. Our bodies started to feel better. We were feeling better as far as like learning things and making sure that we were taking the time to do that kind of thing. But it had this ripple effect into so many other areas of our lives. So now every month we've kind of upped the game a little bit. In December, we decided to add on a daily planning component. So every night before you go to bed, you would just plan out your next day. I talk about this whole planning method in depth on the Live Well Anyway podcast. I will put the link below to that episode so that you can actually hear everything we had to say about what my method is for planning the day. And maybe I'll do a YouTube video here as well about that. If you guys are interested, you can let me know in the comments below. But I just added this component that that we were going to plan out each day and you would get another point for that. And also because some of us were like, oh, I will remember to track my, the things that I did tomorrow. And then maybe a few days would go by and you would forget to keep track of what you'd done and what you'd not done. We actually started getting a point for keeping track of the things. So it in itself was something you got a point for, but helped you to stay on top of seeing what progress you were making. Because as I was doing this process, I made a little grid that we started to check off these things on. And I realized like, I am feeling so much gratification in just being able to see all these check marks of what I've done. Because so much of the time, we don't acknowledge all the things that we do get done. We're really good at seeing all the ways that we fail and all the things that are still left to do that we didn't manage to get done. I am like the worst about this. So for me to have an actual physical record that I could see of all of these little daily habits that I was doing from day to day to day, I started to realize like, I'm doing something. I actually am making progress. As much as I feel like I'm just, floating out here in the middle of nothing, I am doing things that are making a big difference in my life. So just that act of tracking things was a motivator for me to keep doing more. So that is the essence that I have brought into 2024. I am not setting out all these big goals like 10K in 2024. That was a big goal that I had last year, which didn't happen. And so I am much more focused on what I can control, what I can actually make a difference on. Because while I can't dictate that 10,000 people are going to follow me on a certain platform, what I can control is if I show up on that platform. So there's even any content there for people to be following. I can do those things. I can do these smaller little steps that only rely on me. It doesn't rely on any sort of result in order to feel like I'm making progress. And I believe that by doing those little things over and over and over again, it will result in other circumstances happening, the ones that I don't have control over. But for me to set numbers on those things and get very specific of what I want to see happen coming back to me in those spaces, it really just sets me up for a lot of disappointment. So when I can just set out to do the things that I know that I have full control over, and I also want to say, giving myself a ton of grace. Because even though I have this checklist of things that I'm trying to check off every day, I can look at that and make decisions. I can decide, you know what? Today, it means more to me to get a bath than it does to get my dishes done. And I'm not doing that every day. But some days I'm going to give myself that grace and say, I'm choosing to not put the check mark there, which for me is like a really big revelation of I'm not owned by this. I am not a slave to this. I get to decide. This is a motivator for me to help me to make little changes in my life. But I also have the freedom and the ability to say, not today. I'm really worn out of things that have happened in my life or, whatever it is that make me say, not today. That doesn't dictate tomorrow though. I get to come back and make all the check marks that I want to make tomorrow and make fresh choices about those. And it's not an overall like you failed. I'm trying to look at more of what I did accomplish than all the spaces that are empty. And I'm okay with there being some empty spaces. I really am trying to follow that 80-20 rule that generally for me in the past has been very hard to follow. But when I do give myself that grace and I don't knock myself so far down that I throw the baby out with the bathwater and it's like, well, I've already messed up January because I didn't make my bed one day, so I don't have a consistent streak and it's out the window. Instead, when I can come at it from like, okay, well, I chose not to make my bed that day because I was really worn out and I kind of wanted to crawl back into it later and take a nap. So I am okay with that. I am choosing for that white space to be there. That's an okay thing. And it's been really freeing to me to be able to just pick up the next day and start again and acknowledge those things that I am getting done. So that is how I am going about my goals for 2024. I've made my little tracker. I have all my little daily things that I can control, daily and weekly, I should say, that I can control and that I want to do. And it's making a big difference for me personally, but also for a lot of ladies in our Patreon community. So if that sounds like something that you're like, I could really use some accountability and some encouragement We would love to have you come join our community on Patreon. You can go over to patreon.com/livewelltogether, and that is where we all congregate. We have a private Facebook group where I go live 3 times a week, and we talk about all kinds of different topics all throughout the week. It's so much fun. We really get to know each other in there. And then we also have things like these challenges where we encourage each other to be doing the things that we want to get done in our life and making these little daily actions that accumulate over time to make a really big difference. So come join us, patreon.com/livewelltogether. I will also have the link in the description. We would love to see you there. You can also find me at Mackenzie Kappa on Instagram. All right, until next time, go be bold and gracious.